Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sioux Falls budget hearings. Today's date, Tuesday, August 12th, and welcome to all those in attendance in Carnegie and those that might be watching on CityLink or on the internet. Thank you for your interest. We're going to have a little bit different schedule today. We're going to start off our budget hearings with the transit portion of it. Right after that transit is done, we will be adjourning for an executive session that will last possibly 15 minutes, and then immediately after the executive session, we will go back into our budget hearings. Do we have to adjourn and then reconvene? Is that? Yeah, okay. So, just so everybody knows what we're doing today, we will get started. Transit, who is our first presenter? Mr. Cooper, welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Mike Cooper with City Planning and Building Services. I'm going to kick this off. We have a three-tag team presentation. Tracy Turback, our City Finance Director, is going to participate in this along with Sam Terrellcock, our Transportation Planner. We also have other representatives if we have some questions as follow-up. But we wanted to start off our mission statement that we have for Sioux Area Metro, providing a quality, reliable, safe, and cost-effective transportation service. This is the mission that we've been utilizing for some time. And the objectives that we're going to be talking about today that really tie into your decisions as far as the budget, and they also tie into the recent task force report that we'll be reviewing not only this afternoon but as tonight. The objectives are providing a reasonable level of paratransit service. At the same time, we want to grow fixed route services as the city population and the city limits expands. We really want to stabilize our transit system financials. One of the ways that we can do that is with some modest fare increases. And then also another outcome of our task force is to look at not only the city but also looking at the community in terms of dealing with some of our transit solutions. Some demographics or statistics from 2013, because we don't have all of 14 yet, but we divided up between fixed route and paratransit for last year, just over 1 million riders for fixed route and not quite 150,000 for paratransit. And then you equate that to the cost per ride, fixed route, $3.36. as compared to paratransit, which is $24.23. And as we said before, and you'll hear us talk about again today, one of our unique challenges in Sioux Falls is the percentage of our overall transit budget that goes to paratransit. And how do we correct that in the future to maintain a reliable and sustainable overall transit system? What does it take to run our transit system? Well, we have to have a good operator, which we think we do. 104 full-time employees. We currently have 29 fixed route buses, 23 paratransit buses. Those are different ages, different mileage. We have a schedule of when those need to be replaced. We have 12 regular fixed routes. And our hours of operation, Monday through Friday, from 5:45 a.m. to 7:45 p.m. And we recently expanded our service into the evening on 5 of our fixed routes that go until 9:45 p.m. And then Saturdays, our hours are 7:45 a.m. to 7:45 p.m., 12 hours. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Turback and talk to you about our request, our proposal for next year in terms of sources and uses of funds.
Thank you, Mike. On Mike's last slide, he talked about the tangible things that it takes to run the transit system, the people and the vehicles that it takes, and I'll cover the dollars that we expect it to take in 2015 to run transit in just a minute, but I wanted to visit with you a little bit first to have a kind of a sidebar explanation of kind of how the transit budget works, how the financing works, and hopefully that will make the overall picture a little clearer for you folks. When we talk about the transit fund, the transit system receives financial support from the general fund. It's not in and of itself budgeted within the general fund, so you won't see the costs of transit reflected in the general fund budget. When you look in your book, the general fund dollars that do support transit are transferred out of the general fund and into the transit fund. So we maintain a separate and distinct fund called the transit fund on the city's books, and you will see that in your budget book. Along with the general fund dollars that are transferred into the transit fund, we will also be transferring some of our second penny sales tax revenues out of the sales tax fund into the transit fund. When federal dollars come in for transit, they will flow directly into the transit fund. They don't touch the general fund or any other fund. So in that way, by using a separate and distinct fund for transit, we're able to consolidate all of those transit funding sources into one place. And so I think that's an important distinction for you folks to have an understanding of. When it comes to paying for the cost of transit, the operational costs are managed by First Transit, our system operator. And so the dollars for operational costs that flow out of that transit fund then go to First Transit. And First Transit takes those dollars, pools them with revenues that are generated by the system, primarily from fares. And so those dollars are pooled together then in an account, an operating account that's managed by First Transit. And they use those dollars then to pay the day-to-day operating costs of running the system, the payroll for their employees, the fuel for the buses, the maintenance and upkeep on the buses, and so forth. Now, when it comes to bus purchases or other capital expenditures, the city pays those directly out of the transit fund, so those dollars do not flow through that operating account or go through the hands of First Transit. That's strictly directly paid by the city. So because of the way the transit fund is budgeted, it is a separate fund. It will maintain a balance of money within that fund of its own. We talk often about the general fund balance. Well, this is an entirely separate fund that maintains its own balance of money, and throughout the year that balance will go up and down depending on kind of what financial activity is taking place. At the end of last year, December 31st of 2013, there was a transit fund balance of about $1.3 million. So that gives you kind of an idea of how we ended up last year in terms of the money in the fund. And when we've talked recently about accumulating dollars for future bus replacement, it would be within that transit fund that those dollars are then accumulated so that we can build up that fund a little bit in anticipation of replacing buses, and then when the year comes to replace them, spend that money down. So some years you'll see that transit fund balance go up, and some years you'll see it go down, just depending on kind of where we are in that, primarily that capital replacement cycle. So I'm hoping that kind of a sidebar explanation of how the transit budget works will help make some of this make a little bit more sense as we go through the rest of the presentation and the budget process. So with that said, as I say, Mike did cover the kind of the tangible items. I want to break down the transit fund budget that's proposed and the costs or uses of funds for the transit system, starting with the fixed route, both operating and capital, total up to about $6.3 million. The operating portion for the fixed route is up slightly from last year, I think from the current budget, about $100,000 increase. But 2015 will be one of those years when we see a little bit of a spike in our capital spending because we do have some buses that have to be replaced and some other capital needs, and I'll touch on those more in just a minute. Those capital needs, as you've certainly come to understand, are really critical to the overall transit system that we have and present some challenges in terms of the cost of replacing some of that equipment. Looking now at the paratransit, you can see it also has both operating and capital. The total paratransit costs for 2015 are estimated to be about $4.5 million. That $4.3 million for operating is up fairly substantially, about $400,000 from what you saw a year ago. And it's, as you can see, also a relatively low year in the case of paratransit for capital. So those will be, again, quite variable from one year to the next. So the estimate for the total of what it will cost to operate transit in 2015 and make those capital replacements comes to $10.8 million. And we fund that partially from the revenues that are generated by the system, those fare revenues and a little bit of advertising revenue that, that is generated by First Transit in the operation of the transit system. Those direct revenues amount to about $1.1 million, or we anticipate that for 15. So the funding required from that transit fund that I was talking about for 2015 is $9.7 million, and that's the number that you will see in the budget book then relative to the transit fund. I think it's important to note that the transit budget is not being cut. There's no proposal to reduce the transit budget for next year. I know we've heard that in some of the discussions and task force meetings, so I think it's important for you folks as well as everybody else that has an interest in this to understand that the city is not reducing funding for transit. We're not reducing the budget for transit. So how do we fund that $9.7 million that's required from our transit fund? As I mentioned, the general fund provides a significant amount of support. So in 2015, we're anticipating transferring $5.1 million in general fund dollars to the transit fund. That's up 4%, excuse me, 4% from the current year's transfer. In addition, there's $750,000 that we've talked about from the second penny sales tax fund that will be transferred into transit to help fill that gap that's created really by the absence of federal dollars that in the past we would have been receiving for some of those capital expenditures. In addition, we also anticipate about $3.1 million in federal funding. There's also a small amount of state funding within that $3.1 million, but it's primarily federal dollars for transit. That's up slightly. You'll see that in your book, about $100,000 more than the current 2014 budget. The unusual thing about that is that because we are replacing buses next year, we ordinarily would have expected a spike in those federal dollars next year, and we're not seeing that. It's really very flat. And so that's one of the challenges that we've been talking about for some time now, and we're seeing that kind of become reality here in 2015. In fact, the capital funding for transit, and I'm sure you've heard me or Sam mention this in the past, over time had averaged about $1 million a year. Well, next year we anticipate about $250,000 of federal dollars for capital. So that's kind of where we got that $750,000 to fill that funding gap from using our second penny sales tax dollars. Then to round out the $9.7 million, we will be using $700,000 of that transit fund balance that's in that transit fund today. So that gets us to the $9.7 million needed to cover those costs that are not covered by the revenues generated from the operation of this system. I want to touch on just briefly the capital portion of the budget. I mentioned it is a big year for capital, $1.6 million. Primarily for fixed route buses. We plan to replace 3 fixed route buses. I believe that's about $1.2 million, give or take. And then also some security equipment, some what they call video event recorders for the buses that would be installed in all the buses so that there's actually a recording taking place of what's happening on the buses, and then a pickup replacement. So that those couple of slides provide a recap of the 2015 budget numbers, and Sam will come up next and address some of the operational changes that are coming in 2015 and in the future years. And then when he's finished, I'll come back and wrap up the presentation with more of a long-term financial outlook for the transit system. Thank you.
Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Sam Trebilcock, City Planning. I think my purpose today is really to try to bring forward and link what we've been doing on the task force on how that really is coming into this budget, the 2015 budget, and how it will be implemented, as we talk more about it tonight too, in future budgets. So implementing the task force recommendations, how's that going to be done in this budget? First, we're going to take you back to end of last year. And something we were working towards at the end of the last budget was kind of an unsustainable course for our transit fund balance. Tracy just spent a lot of time with you discussing the transit fund and how it works. And this is kind of how it laid out in paper at the end of last year. We were able to put the budget together, council was able to put a budget together, the mayor, for a much more sustainable transit fund. But we didn't get all the way there, and I think that's in large part why council, you decided it was important to do the transit task force. You can see, based on this, the red line was where we were headed before the end of, before in 2013, before the last budget, the 2014 budget. The proposed 2014 budget is the yellow line, and the blue line is the adopted. We expanded evening service at the end, and so that actually brought us down just a tad bit, but it extended service for an important area. So what are we trying to do in this year's budget, in the 2015 budget? As a part of the task force report, consistent with what the task force report has, we're doing essentially what we'll call phase one in the 2015 budget. Starting out with paratransit, we look at what we talked about, grandfathering, some of the no new riders outside that 3/4 mile service area. So essentially that's grandfathering. That's what we would look at bringing forward to council sometime later this fall, is to set a cap or grandfathering or no new riders, no new rides, something like that. We'll, good discussions to have yet exactly how that will lay out for a resolution. But essentially grandfathering people into that area. We're not looking at dropping service next year. We're looking at trying to ensure that we don't have additional services out into that area. Second, and probably most importantly, what we're trying to do next year is work with Dakota Abilities and Lifescape on those work trips, or those agency work trips. And we're specifically going to be working with them outside that 3/4 mile area. So anything that we save in the 3/4 mile area next year is going to be with those agency work trips. Going back to what exactly those are is both of those agencies essentially have dedicated vehicles, paratransit vehicles, our paratransit vehicles that we take their clientele to their work trips that the agencies operate. And underneath the ADA, that's an exception for ADA because it's an agency trip, it's not an individual trip. And it's also a significant part of our paratransit budget right now. And also we know that both those agencies have some transportation infrastructure that we need to better coordinate those resources together. We've been trying to do it for a long time, but this is what the Transit Task Force came up with, is that, hey, we need to try to find a way to start working with another nonprofit organization, bring them into town, start them up, and start see how it would work to have several homes outside the 3/4 mile area serviced by this new nonprofit rather than paratransit. The city will be providing some program support that is within this budget as a part of that. Essentially, it would be about $7 a trip instead of the $23 a trip. And then see how we can work some additional federal funds, some of their funds, and do a coordinated service. That's something that we'd like to pilot this, this coming year. Also, we'd like to work with Project CAR. That's a volunteer driver service. We've talked about that a number of times. This coming year, a contract with them to do some trips that are typically on our paratransit system. As a part of paratransit, we've talked about some modest fare adjustments. The recommendation is to go from $2 to $3. On fixed route, we would have some modest fare adjustments there too, going from $1 to $1.50 on the one rider and $25 to $30. So all these, both those fare adjustments, we'd look at bringing forward to council here yet this fall. Lastly, on the fixed route system, we really think it's important we look at ways that we update our travel training program. I think that's an important marketing device for us. How can people ride, or how can they learn to ride the bus? A lot of people are apprehensive about learning how to ride the bus. They don't know how to. We need to be able to explain it in probably a couple of different terms, depending on the kind of bus rider they are, what kind of disability or disability they have, or what kind of needs they have. Operational adjustments for future phases, we would, in those, from 2015 through 2019, we have a phasing plan in the task force report. How can we continue to align our fixed route service and our paratransit service area? We think that's the most efficient way to do business, and we think that's the way, and the task force report indicates. Continue on our agency support for paratransit, or how can we work with agencies on those work trips, those agency trips. We start looking at areas that within our 3/4 mile area to work with them. And again, how can we utilize our resources best in those areas and work with a nonprofit to do some of those trips. In 2016, we're looking at ending our school tripper service and instead focusing on the existing route services that are provided to those high schools. And by doing that, eliminate quite a bit of heavy capital costs that we have right now. So the savings right there you see with just operation savings in 2015 through 2019, if we look at some of these savings, we could save up to $5.7 million in capital. We'd save up to $2 million. And some of these savings, if you don't do it the first year, you're going to lose it the next year, the next year. And so it's kind of a compounded savings that we think is really important to point out to you as a part of this. Also, as part of the fixed route system, travel training is going to be continued as part of the future phases, including our buddy system. We think that'll be really important to look at, especially for people that have difficulty maybe negotiating the transit system, but physically are able to do so. So a buddy could help them through that process, either short-term or long-term. We're anticipating, as a part of the task force report, that route expansions would be in 2016, 2019, and 2022. So we'd actually look at expanding our area into to new areas and starting next year. After adding all those anticipated fixed route expansions, we're looking at increasing, will be about 1.6 million annually. So really, as we looked at before, any savings that we're able to get in the paratransit area, we think we can at least long-term look at increasing that into the fixed route system. This is our service area. So this is important to look at is when we talk about outside the 3/4 mile area, what does that mean? The outside the 3/4 mile area is that beige area. Historically, it's an area that was our city limits maybe 8 to 10 years ago. Council at that time decided we're not going to continue to expand our paratransit service areas. Council or city council boundaries expand, so we set a static area. Well, that area is still provided, but fixed route services in that area is not provided. You can see there's already people in city limits right now that are not eligible for paratransit services as we continue to expand. We haven't done that. So that outside the 3/4 mile area is the beige area. We'd like to, as we're continuing to look at even expansions of fixed route services, it's important to point out as we expand our fixed route services into potentially, and likely much of it would go into that beige area. We'll need to provide paratransit to that area. So that is important to point out too. What we're trying to do long term as part of the task force report is 4% annually we're contributing, increasing to the general fund. So each year there'll be a 4% increase. Also, as Tracy mentioned, the sales tax fund is increasing its contribution $750,000 annually to kind of close that gap that we had in capital from the federal government. And then there you can see the modest fare increases I was mentioning earlier, the single ride pass. The 30-day pass goes from $25 to $30, and then we're increasing that up to $40 over an 8-year period. And there's the paratransit pass ride. Task force goals, we've been over this before, talk about a little bit again tonight, but I think it's important to, again, bring it together and why it's important and why we're moving this way in our 2015 budget, reducing the cost of paratransit over the next 5 years from 48% to 25% of the budget. So we know that's going to reduce the total budget yearly by about $1.8 million in today's dollars. But then on the other side, we want to increase the fixed route services by about $1.6 million in that time frame to provide reliable transit services for a majority of our residents. Goal 3 is to foster community-based collaboration. As I was talking about, just the same thing with agencies. We know there's services out there that nonprofits are providing or private providers are providing. How can we get those resources working for us most efficiently and in some cases more effectively? There's the travel training program as part of the task force report. We want to try to get it out there to at least 1,000 people a year. And then really importantly, again, we're going to revisit this every year. So we're going to bring back kind of where are we at? When we look at the long-term budget, where do we see the transit fund at in the long term and how are we doing? Do we need to make adjustments? One important thing is what is not changing in 2015. I know a lot of you have gotten comments. I've certainly got comments too from the public. So I think it's important to highlight some of those things. Individual paratransit trips are not changing this year, those existing trips. Agency non-working trips. An individual that might be a client of Dakota Abilities, and if they want to go shopping, that's not going to change. It's really right now what we're looking at is some of those homes that are outside the 3/4 mile area and working on a pilot project this coming year. Existing non-agency rides outside the 3/4 mile area. So we are looking at, if anything, just capping any new rides or riders outside that area. But anybody that has existing rides, that we are not intending to change. We're looking at grandfathering there. Fixed route service will not change in 2015. We're looking at an increase for next year in 2016. And school services will not change this year. It will remain as it has this year also for next year. So I think those are important things to highlight. Next, I'm going to go back to Tracy, and he's going to go through some information on financial sustainability.
Thank you, Sam. I think the task force process identified a lot of opportunities for improving the system that we have, particularly for paratransit. And I think that a lot of different ideas came out, some reasonably acceptable and some unacceptable to some. I think the changes that Sam has outlined for 2015 are a measured approach to put us on the path to solve this issue. I think Sam's last slide in particular ought to provide some reassurance to those who do depend on paratransit services that the changes proposed for 2015 may not be as life-altering as they had come to believe. But with that said, without the changes outlined for 2015, the stated goals of the transit system cannot be achieved. I think in spite of all the additional city funding that's being proposed going forward, without the operational changes and the realignment of the paratransit services, as Sam discussed, the transit system financials will not be stabilized. The system will not have achieved financial sustainability, and there frankly won't be funds available for fixed route bus expansion. In fact, the discussion may become more about where do we reduce fixed route bus service. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the right decisions will be made. I do think we'll find a solution to this. It won't be easy, it won't be pleasant, but I do believe we're on the right track here with some of the changes that are recommended and the additional funding that's being proposed going forward. Future increases in funding for transit are an important part of the solution. They're not the entire solution. This projection of revenues starting in 2015 going through 2026 paints a picture as best we can with what we know today of kind of what our future revenue sources will look like. The starting at the bottom, the green segment there is labeled as direct revenue. That's really primarily the fares, the revenues that are generated from the users of the system. You can see that it's certainly an important part of the revenue structure, but it is the least in terms of the dollars generated. But nevertheless, those fare increases are an important but small part of the solution. The red section is the federal contribution. Again, that's federal funding is always uncertain to a degree. For the purposes of this projection, we've assumed about a 2% annual increase in federal funding going forward. And of course, the blue section is the city contribution. That's where we see over the years to come that's being proposed a significant increase in city dollars. That would be both general fund dollars and second penny sales tax dollars to help fund the capital purchases. So in 2014, those city contributions amounted to $5.1 million. With the increases that we're proposing by 2026, that would grow to $8.6 million. So that speaks to the significance in terms of moving toward a solution that the increased funding really provides. I talked earlier about the transit fund and the transit fund balance and how that will be utilized and managed going forward. This graphic, again, depicts the kind of the ups and downs of that fund balance from 2014 through 2026. If all of the recommended changes are implemented, the realignment of paratransit, the fare increases, the additional funding from the city, if all of those things are implemented, beginning in 2015 and phased in over the years to follow, I believe we can sustain, and this projection certainly indicates that we can achieve financial sustainability for our transit system. This reflects the year-end balance in the transit fund for the next dozen or so years, and it really stands out those years replacing buses when the balance gets spent down and drawn down, and then over the next couple of years or so we build it back up and spend it down again as the next group of buses are being replaced. Looking at that same information, plotting it on the graph, the chart that Sam showed you a minute ago and the one we were looking at a year ago, of course the red line a year ago, if we had made no changes, that we'd still be on that path, which would have that transit fund balance $45 million in the red by 2026. We made some good changes last year. I think took a big step in the right direction by realigning some of our services and making changes. Ultimately added some fixed route services, put us on that blue line, bought us a little bit of time in terms of depleting the transit fund balance. But the green line is really the one that reflects where I believe we need to go. The that shows a sustainable system with a growing network of fixed routes within the city. Reflects the changes that are being proposed by the task force, the changes that Sam has talked about. The phase-in gets us through the bus replacement issues that we're challenged with, and it also reflects the increase in funding from the city. So that's really the good news story here, I think. It's certainly, I think, a manageable challenge. Is something that we can solve. And with that, I'll sit down and we'll all stand by for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Questions? Councilor Jameson.
Tracy, I just wanted you to sit down before I said your name. No, I'm not sure who might answer the question, but on some budget questions on, like, say, marketing. I didn't see it in the book. Just how much money is being spent on marketing? That's one question. Sam, you're probably best. There's a couple of more, if I could.
Last year, or this year, we have a budget of $22,000 in marketing. So, and I believe that would be the same amount that we would look at spending next year. And with that, what we're able to do this year, we do some radio ads. Also, we're looking at this year to do something with what you call Google Transit. We're going to incorporate that. We think that's going to be a great marketing device. And then what we've been able to do with the new bus stop signs and just put up recently here that you see all over town, and hopefully you've all noticed that, has been part of our marketing budget.
If I could, the thing that comes to mind is thoughts like, what does the city spend on other departments? And I don't know if there's a way to find this out, but maybe our staff could help us figure out, like when we have code enforcement. I see other advertising other places about it. I'm just wondering how we fall within the scheme of marketing and we're making such a big effort on what we're going to try to change that maybe 22,000 isn't the right number anymore.
I can't speak to other departments, but I will say that as part of our marketing plan that was done maybe 5 years ago, we looked at other areas of other systems, and with our size system, we weren't at $22,000 the first year, but they recommended about that $22,000 figure then. So we're close with other systems with our size.
I remember that now, you're right. And if I could, I know there's a lot of things that are going to probably get repeated tonight during our resolution on the Transit Task Force recommendations, but still, goal number 3 and 4 of the task force goals essentially require a lot of effort. I think 3 is probably turning those work trips into the nonprofit organization. That's where our success is going to be, is in that effort. Do I have this right? Am I understanding there's $500,000 that we're estimating to invest in this pilot project, or just how much are we investing in the pilot project?
You mean, is the city investing?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to help as a part of that, and as I talked about a little earlier, we're looking at essentially what would be about $7 a ride. There's about 70,000 rides or so that are out there that are agency work trips, and so we're working as a part of that to make that be part of that solution.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you. I guess I really don't have any questions other than to just make a comment at this point that, yeah, we will have some additional and go through some of this stuff again this evening during our regular meeting. The task force has worked very hard, including Councilor Jameson and Councilor Anderson, with me and the people on the committee, the task force, to come up with this plan. It's not perfect. The only thing that would make it perfect is if we had unlimited funds, and then it would be perfect. But or we could make it perfect. But we've come a long ways in sustaining a system that needed to be looked at and reworked, if you will, so that we can provide service not only to people that enjoy the fixed route services, but also those that use the paratransit, and to make it as fair and equitable as possible along the way. So I'm just encouraging you to ask the questions now, and while we got everybody here, and if I can be of service anyway, I'd be happy to do it.
Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. Councilor Kiley.
And I think this is a question for Tracy. Regarding the 2015 transit use of funds, you have a subtraction of $1.1 million for fares, advertising, et cetera. Is that based on today's current fare rate?
No, that would include the projected increase.
The projected increase. Do you know what it would be if the projected increase was not authorized?
How much were we anticipating? It's not a huge difference. We can certainly get that
Sure.
get that for you maybe before we're
That wouldn't
done
be
today.
because we're looking at 50 cents or $1 per fare.
If I could help you with that, 80% of the fares are monthly passes, and that's going up $2.50 on that proposal. And the deal, the regular fare, $1 to $1.50 is what, about 5 or 10% of that, or 15%. And so it's really for the monthly situation, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference because those people are going to use that, and it's still a heck of a buy. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the daily thing.
I'm told the amount of revenue and the 15 projection associated with the increase is about $110,000.
Okay. All right.
10%.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, it's kind of a comment like Councilor Rolfing. Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. This is going to be a very sensitive and emotionally charged topic to be discussing over the next few weeks. We all have friends and or family who count on either or both of these services, so we can all relate and feel what people are thinking or experiencing. One question I have, and we look at the chart that tells us what our transit fund balance will be, but if we made no changes, what would it cost us on an annual basis in additional expenses or revenue? How much more revenue would we have to put into that if we made no changes and kept the system we have now? Do we know what that number is, or is that number easily discernible? And if we can, I guess tonight during the city council meeting, if that number could be shown, it might put a little perspective into where we are or what we're doing. Tracy?
I can take a stab at trying to put that into perspective, and essentially what you're talking about, if we make no changes at all, we would stay on that yellow line that was shown on the graphic. Maybe I can jump back to it here. So by 2026, we will be approximately $20 million in a deficit position. So over the next 12 to 13 years, we would have to have put in $20 million more than we're projecting to put in to keep us
Per year?
than what we're currently. No, total.
Total.
Just to break even.
So if we, on the 2014 proposed line, that yellow line, basically until the year 2019, we would be sustaining where we're at. We wouldn't be going in the hole.
Yeah, excuse me, I was on the wrong line. The blue line, really. So it's up until about 19. They don't. There's not much separation between the two, but it'd be the blue line if we make no changes.
If the train wreck isn't coming next year or the following year, it's coming in about 6 years.
Well, it starts in 19. That's when the bus bubble that we've talked about really takes hold. And on 19 through 23, there are a lot of buses that will be too old to continue operating that we're going to have to begin replacing.
Okay, and that leads into my next question. I'm looking at the number of buses we have. One place says 29 and the other one says 31. I think it was 31 in 2013. Get to my numbers here. Number of buses we have or that we're going to be replacing. Bear with me. I saw where we're going to be replacing Help me out. Do you have that chart on what years were? Oh, wait, never mind. It's in the budget book. According to our capital program, we have 29 fixed route buses and 23 paratransit buses. Over the next 6 years, we're going to be replacing 9 of the fixed route, 9 of the 29 and 14 of the 23 paratransit. Is that enough? It seems like replacing a third of the buses over the next 5 years, are we going to be on course to maintain our fleet adequately?
Well, I believe so, but I'll let, I don't know if Sam wants to, has any real specific color to put on that, but we've spent a lot of time projecting that out over the next 15 years or so, just when those buses can be replaced, when they should be replaced. We had a lot of them that will be essentially the same age in 2019, but we've tried to spread those out over the 2 or 3 years to follow that, to really kind of shave some of that peak off and make it a little more manageable. Certainly, we wouldn't present something to you if we didn't think it was achievable and keep the system running.
But by those numbers, we're saying a bus will last roughly 15 years? Is that?
I believe that's what we're getting out of them currently. Some of them will be 15 years old before they're replaced, yeah.
Sam, did you have something to add?
Well, yeah, I'm going to let Eric speak to this mainly because he has a more ground level view of it. But certainly that bus bubble is what's really important here. We have a lot of buses starting in about 2019, so let Eric.
The fixed route buses, I'm Eric Meyerson with Sioux Area Metro. The fixed route buses have a lifespan of 12 years. The paratransits have a lifespan of 7 years, so the paratransit cycle is more frequent. And what we're talking about as far as the bubble in 2019, we'll have 17 buses will come up for replacement, and by that time they'll probably be costing $500,000 a piece. So you're looking at a huge hit, and that has to be obviously built into the budget.
So by 2019, how many will?
17 vehicles.
And we're programming for 9.
And that's just what Tracy was saying, is that we're going to spread that out and do some of them, a couple of years earlier, and some of them a couple of years later. So we don't, when we do the cycle again, another 12 years, it doesn't all come at once.
Okay. No, but just so the question's asked, I'm kind of, like Tracy said, believe what you're coming up with, but I look at the numbers and it kind of jumps out at me there. A couple other quick questions. When we talk about no new riders outside the 3/4 mile service area, I had one paratransit rider explain to me that she's not a programmed rider. She calls her rider a ride when she needs one, but she's not part of a regular program. Will she be grandfathered in?
Yes.
Yes.
So she had said that, is she inside the 3/4 mile area? And it shouldn't matter.
She's outside the 3/4 mile area.
She's outside, and she has an existing
paratransit now, but she's not part of the program.
Yeah, and that's discussions that we need to have about exactly how we set up the grandfathering language in that resolution. If it's all existing riders or rides, or is it just subscription trips, it can vary. But I know that based upon, what your intent would be, that generally what we want to do is maintain and just cap the rides that we have right now outside that 3/4 mile area at generally a static level. That's kind of
That has not been resolved yet, is what you're telling me.
No, and that would come in a later resolution than even what we're talking about tonight. We would come forward with a separate resolution.
If I could, I think I get this right to help me if I fall out of line here, but right, the hard language of the task force recommendations is to stay within the 3/4 mile distance, but it becomes very painfully obvious that is not an acceptable feature in this proposal, because we will we'll be run out of town if we do that, I think. And so the idea is that we have talked about collectively is grandfathering them in today so that we can work towards a transition and a timeline that everybody is aware of in our whole community, that, look, this can't be like this forever. We've got to start trimming it back. Nobody really wants to be the guy who trims it back, but we've got to start the process of getting ready to trim it back, if you know what I mean, so that we all become a part of the discussion. And so anybody who's using it today is going to still continue being provided the service, but the conversation as a community has started that we cannot continue it as today. And as we expand those fixed route services, we'll pick up other areas of town that all those new individuals who aren't using it today now have access to it. But we're just hoping to prevent somebody from building or buying a home or an apartment or something outside of that service area and expecting us to come get them no matter where they are. We want to know now, everybody on notice, that there's a change coming. So does that help?
Yeah, that helps me out a lot, because I guess I understand that going forward we're not going to accept any new, but I didn't know if there's a difference between a programmed and a non-programmed, somebody that's using the system, because that question was asked of me and I said I would bring that up. What is a non-agency ride? On, I don't know what screen page it must be, 19.
Yeah, essentially it's an individual ride. They're not aligned with a client of a particular agency. When we're talking about there, it's typically with the Dakotability or Lifescape are the agencies that have the work trips. So that's what we mean.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Kiley.
Any way of determining or knowing now how many riders we pick up each year in paratransit that are outside that 3/4 mile area? Because if we do cap it today, can we project a year from now how many we might be leaving unserviced, without service?
Well, I think it's hard to tell. I mean, right now, what we'd like to think, and the reason I think we're looking at grandfathering to begin with is because people moved into that area knowing that that area was served. I think a lot of people that need those services will move to an area that has those services. And that's kind of what we're trying to set up here. We're trying to set up a phasing plan that will align those areas over time so people can make the adjustments during essentially a 5-year period is what we're looking at.
And also, if we do increase the fixed route service area, that's going to extend that 3/4 area as well, too. And we hope to do that by 2015 with 16.
Yeah, we'll look at a fixed route service extension in 2016.
Okay.
So part of the area we'll look at.
Right.
Councilor Anderson.
Sam, stay up there. My turn.
All right.
Let's talk about Project CAR. What has been determined the number of volunteer drivers we're going to need to fulfill the expectations for Project CAR?
I haven't talked to Kate about the specific number of an increase. She knows that she would be able to, with the contract that we're looking at, which is essentially, I believe, 10 rides a day. We're looking at targeting specific rides that are on our system that they would be able to do that probably be ambulatory rides. And we would set up a small contract to do that. She knows long-term that we are working as part of the task force again with the recommendations that she is going to need more volunteer drivers, and we're going to set up a volunteer driver program to do that, along with Workers on Wheels.
Do we really think that's going to be realistic with some of the problems we've seen with school bus, trying to get drivers and things like that?
You know, it's for volunteer services, we think so. I mean, I think it's important that we are able to recruit and train adequately those drivers and do it in a systematic manner. Right now, that's not happening, able to happen, but we think we can make some good headway.
What type of requirements are we going to put on those drivers to be volunteers? Are they going to have the same requirements as the paratransit and transit drivers, or no, are we going to look at cutting back on that, or just using what Project CAR already has?
Generally, that's what we're looking at, is what their program provides. There might be some additional things looking at, like some background checks or things like that, but those are things that we're yet to determine on the volunteer program. But They certainly wouldn't be the DOT requirements that would be required or anything like that for the volunteer program.
Okay. With that being said, then are we still looking at approaching the taxis?
With the taxis, I think what
Manner.
with the taxis, what we really wanted to do as part of the, and we show it in the task force report, is if there's ways that we can set up some kind of a corporate funded or funded system to help with event rides home, especially coming home. We know there's a need for it. We heard it as part of the task force, and we wanted to focus on that, and that's what we heard.
Because those rides would be at a lower cost than what we're experiencing with paratransit with the ambulatory.
Right.
Because you're saying $23 a ride, you know, depending on the distance, you know, even with using a taxi or something, that ride is going to be a amount less.
But, you know, again, getting back to the taxis, and not getting into too much detail, but the taxis weren't really interested in getting in real deep into the paratransit area. They wanted to look at more of a targeted area, and we kind of highlighted those event trips as a possibility.
Well, when I had discussions with them, it was more of the ambulatory area, not the paratransit.
Oh,
but,
sure.
But once again, in your earlier statements that you've made, that half of the ridership in paratransit is ambulatory. So there could be a great reduction in those paratransit rides if we were able to use a project car combined with maybe a project taxi or something like that. Yeah. Am I on the right track there?
To a degree, I think we heard some reluctance when we talked to the taxis about getting into the program too deep, but I think on a limited basis they were interested. That's what we heard.
I do remember those conversations. I think that some of the reluctance came to all the added requirements that you were going to put on taxi. Right. And I'm looking at it as saying, if we're going to do this, you do it the same way you do it with Project Car, because there is no difference then. You know, if you're looking at trying to reduce this, we have to look at all options. And it's just an option I feel that has not been approached correctly. And I think that we do need to have more conversations with the appropriate taxi companies on this to try to come up with something. And that's just on that one. What are we going to do with the old buses that are going to be retired from service? Are we looking at any type of way to move those to like a project car or to the agencies for their usage? Because those buses still have a life cycle.
That's a possibility, I suppose. You know, I might look at what Sioux Area Metro would see in terms of the specific life on each one of those vehicles. So it's always a possibility. They, like any vehicle at the city, they go out to bid for anyone to purchase. So it's a possibility that they could be picked up by those different agencies.
And if I could add just one thing to that, Kenny, the buses themselves, the bus drivers in those situations, those type of vehicles with over 16 people in them, require a CDL and other requirements that are not required for paratransit, or not paratransit, but for Project Car and that kind of thing. So
and I do understand that, but that could be another option for those agencies to be able to provide those services. So, I mean, it's just things to take a look at is what I'm looking at, if I may.
One more, Counselor.
And then discussing the rate increases. You know, take a look at the demographics of the people that we're serving here, and this isn't this is a service that we provide here, that every city our size provides for the citizens. The demographics of the people that are on these trips and these rides are either lower income or fixed income. And I guess I'm just sort of hoping that we can take a look at, and especially after Councilman Karski's questions, on how this is going to affect the financial projections here. If we could, I'm not saying I don't want to increase some of these rates, but I would like to see maybe a little smaller increments over time and, you know, bringing them up. I just feel that like $1 increase on paratransit when most of those riders are basically fixed income is going to be a major impact on those individuals. So it's just something that I am very concerned about and hope to work with, you know, Councilman Jameson and Rolfing and yourself on that in the future too.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you. My question really Councilor Anderson kind of asked it. I guess I would just put out there this idea that these fare increases that we're proposing jump pretty fast, jump faster than I really thought they did as I've studied it more and more. And next year it only makes up $110,000.
No, $1.1 million.
No.
The
Fares
increase
are
is
$110,000. Fare increases for 2015 is $110,000.
Increase, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just struggling with that. That's all. That's all I've got.
Councilor Kiley.
Well, it certainly is a challenge. And just to go off what Councilor Anderson had mentioned, right now, a lot of our riders are primarily in the low income, or they have a need to use paratransit. And maybe we need to be focusing as a city to change that culture and encouraging all of us in here to ride the bus for the other good reasons, just environmental reasons, and traffic congestion and saving on our streets. So that's something that I would throw out in addition to what Councilor Anderson had mentioned. But it is, again, with the paratransit, that is a part that I struggle with. I certainly feel better after finding out a few weeks ago that the individuals currently using paratransit that are outside the 3/4 mile radius would be grandfathered in. That helps me tremendously. But when you look at paratransit, if I did my calculations right, it represents just over 12% of our total ridership when you combine paratransit and the fixed ridership together. Yet it costs more than 7 times that per ride when compared to the fixed bus system. So, and then going back to what Councilor Jameson had mentioned, goals number 3 and 4, which again, goal number 3 is employing the nonprofit agencies and helping us in this situation. And goal number 4 is the training program that helps people to transition from paratransit to fixed route. Those are extremely important in us reaching these goals or accomplishing what we would like to. I might also say that with goal number 4, if we can help individuals transition from paratransit to fixed route, I think that they would actually find that it's going to be much more flexibility in the system, especially for last minute appointments, because I understand you have to book paratransit at least 24 hours in advance. And so that is good. And I have heard from a few individuals that have transitioned that they have found it to be rather liberating.
Thank you, Councilor Kiley. I have one more question. Part of the, well, a big part of the plan is to expand our fixed route system. I don't know if that means more buses. Is that factored into this capital budget, the 5-year capital budget, if we're expanding our fixed route? Plus, if we're expanding our fixed route, obviously we'll catch more people within that 3/4 mile radius. Is that factored all? How is all that factored in, or is it factored in?
Well, certainly the transition that we go from savings in our paratransit system, we know that we're going to have some paratransit buses that won't be utilized then unless we catch them in the replacement process. So on the fixed route system, when we do, we're hoping that we can transition some of those buses and make use of them in some way as part of our fixed route expansions. So we're looking into that, how that might work best. So that's kind of where we're at, is in trying to make it work in the transition. And then as we transition, again, the same amount that we would typically use for paratransit buses, then we could put that money into fixed route buses instead.
So basically cost shifting is what you're telling me,
Right.
from the one to the other. Okay. Council, I need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we move into executive session to consult with legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2 subsection 3.
I second that.
Councilor Kiley, Councilor Urbanbach, thank you. A motion and a second to move into executive session. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will adjourn for executive session. It is now 4:07. We will reconvene
Sunday morning. Ford junk vehicles all lined up and stacked on the corner there. And then by Monday.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the budget hearings. The budget hearings will start in 60 seconds.
Is that Candace Gearman way in the back?
No.
Who is tonight's Who is tonight's meeting?
Denise.
Denise?
Oh, man.
I had last Monday night, so.
Share the joy. Welcome back to City Council budget hearings. We are going to reconvene and start right up with urban planning. Mr. Cooper, welcome back.
Thank you. Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Before I start, I wanted to go actually back to a previous presentation that we did today regarding transit. And I wanted to thank our finance team because they have put together a huge effort to help us get through these budget presentations. The one that I'm going to go through now is fairly simple, but we want to really, again, compliment the finance team because they do help us, they do support us, and make this process much more enjoyable because some people really like looking at numbers. So here we go. Planning and Building Services, our mission, we have 3 divisions: planning, zoning, building services. We're managing the orderly development of Sioux Falls, ensuring public safety in our building construction and maintenance, and overseeing the protection of property. Those are the 3 things that we have in our mission statement. And so in 2015, we're proposing to be investing $5.3 million, including both operating and capital. And this picture that we have up on the screen is our new permit counter that was recently opened on ground floor of City Hall as part of our Phase 1 building renovation. So a little bit historical data on construction permits, and I know every month when Tracy Turbeck gives you the financial report, a lot of this is also presented, but again, we're growing, we have more activity in terms of overall permits and property valuation and inspections. And so far, actually this is about a week old, we're at about $342 million in terms of permit valuation. And our number of permits is also continuing to grow. This year we're getting a lot of smaller permits, but the number of them keeps ramping up. So the level of activity that we're involved with continues to expand. As we look at our 2015 budget request, the revenue side is $3.2 million. We're fortunate, I would say, as a department that we generate a lot of fees because people come to us for building construction, zoning, whatever it might be, and we're able to collect revenue. So in our licensing and permitting revenue, we projected for building permits, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and license fees, all the different codes that we are able to collect in terms of fee requests. Our other revenue is primarily federal funding that we use for transportation, as well as for historical preservation. That's about $207 million, $207,000. Just seeing if they're paying attention back here. And then charges for services, another revenue source that we collect every year, $238,000, and then fines through code enforcement, $85,000. And you can kind of see the historical trend line hasn't changed a lot, but that's what we're proposing. So as we put together our operating budget, again, like you've heard from other departments, primarily personnel of the 5.2 million, 4.3 million in personnel, and then the other operating costs are just under $1 million. Our trend line isn't shifting dramatically from year to year. So as we put together our operating budget for 2014, we start out at 5 million. One of our initiatives for next year is to add a new staffing position, which is part of the request that Bill O'Toole went through with you earlier. We are asking for funding to hire a permit technician, and this would be a person that would be staffing that permit counter full-time, helping to deal with the public as they come in many cases able to do small, simple permits, like for a house. We can do those relatively quickly, but also being able to bring in other staff as needed. And that's, we think, is going to really help dramatically our customer service. The overall cost for that is $66,000, but we're also going to be able to eliminate some part-time staffing costs that we are taking on for this year. So the total wages and benefits would be $100,000. Rentals, we're going to be starting up an InterGov system shortly this year. There'll be some technology rental fees that we have to pay for, $87,000. And then we're also going to continue the trend that we started a year or so ago, maybe it's been 2 years ago, of transitioning all of our vehicles over to fleet, and then we pay them a rental fee. So that total will amount to $103,000, and then other is $7,000. So from $5 million to the recommended $5.2 million is some pretty basic changes for 2015. Again, what are we trying to accomplish with the planning, zoning, building services? Looking at requested plans and reports that we do through our work program. Not only do we initiate projects, but we also help other departments. As an example, this year we're helping community development with a downtown plan. We work with engineering and public works on a lot of transportation plans. We're updating our long-range transportation plan and also working through Southeastern Council of Governments. So we identify those every year, what we think our priorities should be. Development plan applications with the Planning Commission hearings that come to you as far as recommendations. We try to keep those target dates because they do meet monthly of looking at a 40-day time period for those development plan applications. One that we want to focus more on going into next year with educational outreach, with our international codes that we adopt on a 3-year cycle. We come back to you for various code amendments and updates. And whenever we do that, we actually reach out to the industries ahead of time of looking at what the draft changes are. And then once those codes do come to the council for approval, we go back and do training, educational sessions as needed. It might be with home builders. It might be with the different industries. So we do spend a lot of time and focus on educational outreach. With our land management program, again through InterGov, we're going to be coaching not only our own staff and training them how to use the new software system, but contractors, consultants, home builders, whatever it might be, anybody that wants to learn how to do permits online, how to work more with inspections, there'll be opportunities for us to provide that educational. And then with zoning, with shaped places, we're obviously still going through a learning curve. There's some additional things that we're going to be bringing back to council, to citizens, as far as educating them on what's in that zoning ordinance, and then also potentially looking at some future amendments. So as we look at how can we enhance our customer capabilities with more responsive and efficient services, we have that 1-day time frame for residential building permits. And then for a non-residential request of inspections, we actually, our mission hasn't really changed, that we want to have those within 1 day. And again, this is another picture of our workstation, the new workstation that we have. This particular picture is the zoning division that have the larger tables that they can lay out the plans. but on the computers, we're also going to have the capability to do that online electronic version. So it's working out pretty well. Phase 2 of our renovation, we're hoping will be done in October, and that will involve moving the planning division from second floor down to ground floor. They will all be in one floor, and that's why, again, we think that permit technician staff can really enhance our customer service. So a fairly simple budget. You recently approved some fee increases for us, and we appreciate that. And those are being incorporated into our 2015 budget request.
Questions from the council? I have two, if I could, Mike. Under your operating expenditures, you're going up 50%, which sounds like a lot, but it's from 600,000 to 900,000 from 2012. Do you anticipate, is that a trend line that'll continue? Will it be dropping back down?
I don't think no, I think it'll fluctuate, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you had mentioned the staffing that you'd be eliminating. You'd be increasing one full-time position, but
we reduced our part-time budget.
Yeah, it shows you going from 1.1 part-times in 2014 to 1.2, and the number of full-times from 42 to 43.
I think I phrased it wrong. We reduced how much of an increase we would be asking for if we continued with just the part-time staff.
Okay, government
That's
language.
A better way
I get it now.
Trying to
Okay.
explain it, yes.
Okay.
We reduced the increase.
The anticipated.
There you go. See, that's a non-budget person talking about numbers, so yes.
Starting to sound
Okay.
like a Fed.
Yes.
Reduce the increase.
Okay, other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate your attention and support.
I think, Mary, are you up next, library?
Good afternoon, Mary Johns, Siouxland Libraries, and we're glad to be here to talk to you today about our requests for next year. I would like to initially, like everyone else, thank the finance team. These folks are amazing, and they make all of this process much easier for all of us because, as Mike just mentioned, not all of us are numbers people. And another thing I would like to mention for new counselors is that Siouxland Libraries came about, if you're not aware, as a result of a merger with the county system and the city system back in '95. And this has proven to be a very successful partnership. And so as a result of that, we have a library board that is composed of both city representatives and county representatives. And I certainly want to acknowledge the library board for their advocacy and support of library services as well. And, you know, honestly, we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the staff members that provide the service to the library. And so even though this is a budget talk today, quite honestly, we owe a great deal to our staff that does an exceptional job. And then specifically, Jody Fick, Assistant Director, and Ann Bowden, our budget analyst, they are kind of like miracle workers as we do this. So I just want everyone to understand that those folks do a great deal for all of us in the city. And I probably should think about using this. Again, as Mike mentioned in his overview, our basic premise hasn't changed. We're still in the business of delivering library service and books, and we want to expand that access to as much of our community as we possibly can. And certainly we're able to do some of that by using technology. We want to make sure that the materials and resources that we have available are meaningful and timely for our customers. And certainly we want to make sure that the service we provide is not only fast and efficient, but truly meets their needs. And certainly you helped us with that part about efficient service with the technology that we were able to implement previously. And then, of course, what are we about besides learning? And really, that mission is not going to change forever. And as much as people like to think that the book is going away, you know, we tend to believe differently. But we do realize that our commitment to the community is more than just reading. It really is about learning. And an important part of that is the early childhood literacy and education, which all of us are aware of, that there are needs in our community. So our capital budget this year, and as, again, for the new counselors, our collections, our book materials, are a part of a capital collection, which is a bit unusual in some libraries, but that's perfectly fine. It's how it works for us. And so that's all we have in our capital request this year is for our materials. And I would just mention that in addition to the books and the ebooks that you're all aware of, we've also added a new service this year called Hoopla, and there's been a lot of hoopla about that. It's actually streaming movies, music, and TV shows. So we make every effort to keep up with the technology. In our operating budget, again, the biggest portion of our budget, and it goes for personnel, which truly are the assets that we all have. And we wouldn't be doing this without those members. And you will notice that there is a slight decrease, actually, when we get to the next slide, in our personnel budget. And then other operating takes care of all of the technology and programs and supply support and so forth that add to this piece. So our wages and benefits are down a bit because we had several very significant retirements last year, long-term employees, and we have actually done some reorganization as a result of that. And so those positions were filled in a different manner and at a lower position level, so that what we were doing was putting more direct service to our customers, and so we cut back in the administrative area. The professional services that you see, there is an increase and request for additional funding for security at our main library. And this will just allow us to have uniformed security during all open hours. We've had security for some time, and typically they didn't come in until the middle of the afternoon. And we have found by making some modifications this year that has made a significant difference in how we work at the library and how our customers feel. Repair and maintenance that we have is certainly the maintenance on our equipment, and the 3M in particular, remember, that's the one where you provided significant funding for 53 pieces of equipment that we maintain now. And we certainly want to make sure that we continue to do that. And then we have building repairs and maintenance that include tuck pointing and painting at Oakview and flooring replacement at Ronning. And then the rest of the supplies and materials covers virtually everything else. This one is a little tricky for me, the non-budget person. In reality, the $190,000, and then you look down and you see $210,000. Well, last year there was a $20,000 inclusion in the budget for a one-time expenditure for new software for PC reservation, which allows us to monitor and sign up people for use of the computers. And so the difference between 210 and 190 is 20, and the 210 then is for a new automated system this year that will replace the online catalog and circulation system that we currently have. That system we have had, I believe, since like '87 or something, and there have been some upgrades, but we're really operating on a legacy system, really. And so what we'll be doing with the new ILS is it's really about software and software as service. So rather than having to replace servers and so forth in the future, we'll just be buying software to upgrade and enhance that catalog system. The current and relevant materials, as I mentioned earlier, is really very important to us and to our customers. And I think we're there to a great degree when adults say in their comments, coming here is like a candy store, because I love to read and I can find everything I need, and I rather appreciated that comment, which also speaks well to the staff that selects the materials. Okay, the really fun part now is about this fast and efficient service. I am so pleased with what staff have done with this technology and how they've embraced this and didn't fear that technology was going to take their jobs away, but rather that this was a way to help them do their jobs more effectively and to spend more time with our customers. So, of course, we have increased the self-check numbers, and actually that's your first choice, and in some instances that's really your only choice. And that works really well. So we're at about 95% of the materials checked out are at the kiosks. And I just thought you might like to see how that works if you haven't been in. This is a gentleman returning materials that they've checked out. as he puts those items in the induction unit, the system checks the item in, resensitizes it. This is the backside of that operation. It sorts those materials into predetermined bins so that our staff is not looking at each item and touching it there. They only touch it when they take it out of the bin, put it on a cart to shelve. And it's been impressive. We still get great compliments from our customers, and everybody's ooh and ah when they see it, and other libraries have come to look at that piece. Last year, we also told you that we were going to do a customer survey, which we did. And of course, I'm showing you the best parts of this. Yes, there were a couple of things about that were negative to a certain degree, but those were like, we need more books, we need more videos, we need more. So it was all about more of what we're already doing. But I think this also speaks very well to the staff that we have, when 98% of our customers are satisfied or very satisfied with the service and are likely to recommend it to other people. Again, we're back to promoting the whole idea of reading and learning, and we do this with all age groups. Adults, we provide a number of classroom-type services. And again, those are based on needs from our customers. We get lots of requests for helping customers with digital devices, and that certainly is a part of what we do. Jobs and careers are certainly a big issue at our library, as they are in many libraries throughout the country, and we will continue to use these types of resources to educate and help our customers. On the teen angle, teens are a hard nut to crack, quite honestly, when it comes to libraries. And so we're doing a number of different things, and we'll be looking at more of those as we move forward. But I would like to share that this year we did a teen lock-in, which meant after hours, the library closed, and you had to register ahead of time, but then you were in the library till 9 or 9:30. And the idea was, what goes on at the library after we close? And of course, in some places, it's cleaning, which people don't always think about. So the kids were in there, and they had all kinds of activities that were related to reading or books, and we did one partnership with Washington High School where we actually held the lock-in there, and our staff from Oakview participated in that. The rest of the lock-ins we had at each of the locations throughout the city, and one in Brandon. And from all reports, that was very successful, and kids wanting to do it again. And I'm thinking, gosh, they're excited about talking about books. That's kind of a perfect way to do things. So we're real happy with that. One that we've talked with you about before in terms of early literacy and the children's programs is a program called Reading Bridge, and this is a program that we've been doing for about 14 years now. And we have volunteer tutors. We do pay them a stipend. In the past, we've kind of put this together with nickels and dimes, but they meet and have gone from 3 locations to 8 locations this year. We received a significant donation from a private individual for supporting the Reading Bridge program. And so we're expecting that this program will only grow. And the important part about this really is that every study shows that kids who do not read during the summer lose reading skills. It's called the summer slide. And so we want to do whatever we can to help with that. So in addition to the regular summer reading program that we do, we also provide this service. And again, it's rave reviews. And the other piece in this slide is a picture of our 3rd annual book walk, which is along the River Greenway, and we have 2 children's books that we've enlarged the pages and laminated. And you start at one end and read a book along the way, turn around and go back to the other end, read another book. And the first year we had about 150 people show up for this. We had over 450 this year. Yeah, it was pretty stunning. And of course then we have some other activities along the Greenway, but everything that we can do to promote reading is exactly where we are. And again, you've heard this before in terms of the value, but it seems to me that this is pretty self-indicative that that library card is a valuable piece of plastic that we share with folks. And we will be doing a big push for Library Card Sign-Up Month in September. And if any of you don't have a card, see me later. If you have questions, what do you geek? Is our way of ending this with Geek the Library is a national campaign that we initiated several months ago, and it runs for 9 months. And the whole idea about geek is a verb. And so we're using this mechanism to find out what our customers want and enjoy. So we have chalkboards set up all over in various ways for people to, and posters of people saying, I geek football, I geek World War II, whatever it is. And so then we use that information to build services, programs, and resources. Thank you.
Questions for Mary? Christine? Councilor Erickson?
At our informational meeting, we had a young girl talk about keeping the libraries open on Sundays through the summer. Is that, I know it's not directly related to the budget, but I know at one point we were told maybe that was going to be built into the budget with an FTE moving around the wages. Can you just explain that maybe a little bit?
Absolutely. Sundays will be a routine process come next summer. And you know, as I mentioned to several people, there is no reason that we can't do this. And we certainly will be doing that. The schedule right now is we've built it and everything for the rest of this summer. But when we start opening on Sundays in September, we will be open Sundays year-round.
And is it all of the libraries? Or
That's correct.
It is.
All of the city libraries.
City libraries from
Yep.
12 to whatever. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good question. One of my own. Councilor Anderson?
Mary, one thing you did not speak of that I'd like you to, please. A couple months ago, I went to a grand opening in Colton of a library. And could you speak to our joint program that we do with other cities in the Minnehaha County area?
Absolutely. That was a stunning day, wasn't it?
It really educated me on how, you know, we are being the big brother and helping the smaller communities be able to do something. The hour I spent in that library was just amazing, talking to the people of the community and how much they really cared enough to build a library, and they're going to man it, and there's a lot of great things happening in these little towns that our library is working with. So if you would speak to
Absolutely.
that, please.
And again, for benefit of those who don't know, when we merged with the county system, essentially Siouxland Libraries now operates libraries in other communities. And we have libraries in Brandon, Valley Springs, I always have trouble with this, Brandon, Valley Springs, Garrettson, Colton, Crooks, Hartford, Humboldt, Baltic. I always have trouble doing the 8. I have to figure out an alphabetical way. And so the responsibility for those physical facilities lies with the individual cities. So they either provide the building and own it, or they rent the building and provide the structure. And as Councilor Anderson commented, Colton has been in a very small, not real efficient building, and lots of repairs needing attention and so forth, and they were renting that property. So this community got together and decided that they really needed a new facility. And the elevator company was building a new office for their operation. So they gave to the city their old building, which is basically like a double-wide modular unit. And so the city then acquired the property to put the building on. The community raised the money to provide the furnishings and do all of the remodeling that it took. And this was donated services from a number of people. They had an auction, they had a dinner, they had jars at the local businesses, including the bar, for people to put their loose change in. Kids would bring in allowances. And so the community just, rallied together like there was no tomorrow. This was truly a community effort. And so the building is up now. We had an opening in May, I believe it was. And this is a situation where this is truly a community library. Everybody in that town owns that library in the most positive way. And so it's been amazing what has happened there. And it speaks both in terms to what the community believes their community needs and the quality of life that they want, the services that they receive. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it really is an excellent experience. And if you're ever driving by Colton or out on a Sunday afternoon, whatever, at least look in the windows. It's an amazing building. They built a community room with it. So yeah, it's great.
Great story, Mary. Thank you. Other questions? I have one, probably of Tracy, a comment that Mary made that I'd like to maybe follow up on. We include books in our capital budget. And we're always looking for, it seems like our capital side of our budget always could use a little bit more money than our operating side. Maybe I'm wrong. But can we explain why we keep books in the capital budget, why we couldn't transfer that to our operating side and free up some more money for our capital budget?
The easy answer is that the book collection as a collection does meet the definition of a capital asset. And so that's why they're budgeted as a capital item. It is viewed as a collection, not as individual items.
Is that a state definition or our own definition? Or
I believe that's probably our own definition, although I don't think it's all that unusual to capitalize the collection of books. I think that's very common among libraries to capitalize them. How the purchase of books is funded will vary a lot from community to community.
I'm just, like I said, curious if there is a way to maybe change that, because to me a book is expendable. They unfortunately don't last long and they have a life, and it's not like a building or a big piece of equipment, but just looking forward, I guess, and trying to get more money in our capital budget. So, other questions? Councilor Kiley.
Just to continue with what you were saying, I think, though, the difference with a book is that it's ongoing. It's not going away until its life has been reached, similar to our other buildings and so forth, too. So it's not like a paper supply material that you're going to use once and throw. But, my 2 cents worth.
I appreciate
I'd like
that.
to say, Mary, I certainly appreciate your enthusiasm. You are the right person for the job.
Seems to me it comes down to definition, so if we can change the definition, make our budget work better. I'm just looking for ways. All righty. Parks and Rec. Mr. Carney, welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. Don Kearney with Parks and Rec. Appreciate the opportunity to present our budget to you. As with the other directors who've been up here before, I certainly want to thank all of our staff that helped to build this budget up, as well as our finance team, who really do a lot of close work with our staff to put this together for you. So appreciate their efforts. A little bit on the overview for Parks and Recreation. The services we provide include providing recreational opportunities for all ages. We have now 78 parks and nearly 30 miles of trails that we maintain. We have 5 community centers and 4 enlarged gyms in cooperation with the various school districts that are within our city limits. We also have 8 outdoor aquatic facilities and a indoor facility coming up. We also do urban forestry management. And then we also have another category that we spend a considerable amount of time and effort on, and that is other public property maintenance. That includes things like drainage ways, street medians, and other grounds for other departments that we maintain as well, like libraries and water treatment plants and water tower sites and some of that as well. We plan to invest $23.9 million in 2015, which includes both the operating and capital. As it relates to capital for 2015, we do have an $8.1 million budget for that. And in 2015, we plan to add 3 new neighborhood parks. They include Southern Vistas, which is adjacent to Pettigrew Elementary School, Prairie Hills West, which is located south of 69th and east of Louise, and a new Southeast School Park site where we'll be doing some preliminary development in cooperation with the Harrisburg School District, which is located approximately at 68th and Bonson. We also have our cyclic programs that are kind of the backbone of our making sure that our system is solid throughout the entire city. We will be doing considerable efforts with renovations at Lacey and Bryant Parks, which are on the north side of town. We'll also be working in Tower Park on North Main, Beetle, Greenway, which is the area west of Cliff Avenue and south of the river, and Burnside, which is in the event center area as well. So we'll be doing quite a work on courts, playgrounds, shelters in those areas to really improve the quality of those parks. We also have Falls Park West Phase 1 improvements. It's the first of 3 phases that are programmed into the 5-year capital plan. The first phase would include diagonal parking on the east side of Phillips Avenue, along with some walkways as that first phase of development next year. And then we also have a project in Falls Park near the Overlook Cafe, the Turbine House area. We want to shore up some of that because of some erosion, and so we'd like to do a project there as well. And then we'll also be constructing the West Side Dog Park at Family Park. We also have a couple partnership projects in 2015. One of those happens to be the Tubing Hill at Great Bear. This is a project that would essentially construct 8 new sledding lanes, basically modeled after our best lane that we currently have in the grades on that particular run. It fixes the run-out issue that we've had historically in the past, where we're trying to make sure we catch people before they slide too far. It would also install a conveyor to get people up and down the hill much quicker. And ultimately, the goal is to reduce the lines on the Tubing Hill. There are times when we've got 45-minute wait times between runs. And by adding the additional lanes, providing the conveyor, we're really going to be able to improve the experience. And what's really nice about it is that the Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated Board of Directors has agreed to pay for half of that cost. And so we're really excited about it. It's kind of been the bottleneck of Great Bear, and we're really excited about this project. The other partnership project that we have is at the zoo. It includes a brown bear exhibit remodel for about $400,000. $150,000 of that would be provided by the Zoological Society. And certainly Elizabeth will be up here towards the end of my presentation to talk about what's going on at the zoo. But it will enhance that exhibit with a new dig area, a water feature, better viewing of that exhibit, and she'd certainly be the expert as it relates to more specifics on that particular project. So we're excited about both of those public-private partnerships that we have in our capital program. As it relates to the 2015 Parks operating budget, we are proposing a $15.9 million budget. 9.3 of that would be in personnel, and 6.6 million would be in other operating. This represents a 6.7% increase over our 2014 approved budget. So how did we build the operating budget for Parks and Recreation? Currently our budget is $14.9 million. We then added $500,000 in wages and benefits. It includes 2 new park service workers to help maintain those other public properties that I talked about earlier. It would also include rate increases for our seasonals to remain competitive in the marketplace, as they represent a significant portion of our workforce out there. They are really the frontline folks that do a lot of the heavy lifting. And so it's important for us to be able to continue to recruit and retain those folks. And then there are also some other non-discretionary personnel increases that make up that total. There's also an increase in professional services, which is due to a proposed 8% increase in the zoo's operating support per our management agreement with the zoo. It has been since 2006 that the zoo has had any increase in support for operating budget from the city, and the 8% represents approximately $107,000. We also are seeing some slight increases in repair and maintenance due to inflationary increases to really just maintain the level of service that we have out there now. We also see some increases in supplies and materials due to volume increases in fuel, and then costs associated with publishing our activities guides. Obviously, as our city continues to grow, we have to provide more and more activity guides to the residents of Sioux Falls, but we're also proposing to add some pages to be able to promote the activities that we're providing to the community, both in our fall and our winter-spring guide. Utilities are increasing as well due to rate increases and costs associated with operating the Ice and Rec Center. And certainly want the council to know that we have included money to operate the Ice and Rec Center of approximately $200,000, as well as a projected revenue of $54,000. So in total, it's a little 900 plus thousand between the 14.9 million that we currently have to get to the 15.9 million as recommended in the 2015 budget. As it relates to our outcome indicators, as you can see, providing recreation programs is one of the desired outcomes for our department operations. In 2012, we offered 180 programs. In 2013, we ramped up those programs to 267. And then for 14 and 15, you can see that our target is 190 for both of those years. Really trying to strike that balance between quality and quantity. And some of the other things that cause those numbers to vary a little bit are the way we define our classes. For example, we have a Sounds of the Falls concert series. Well, we had defined that as one program, but we actually had 13 concerts. And so it's a little bit more about how you track that, but we really are focusing on making sure that the quality is there. And you'll see with the next slide that we're really trying to make sure that when we do offer a class, the classes go or the program goes. We do track the enrollment capacity. You know, we want to make sure that those fill up so they happen. In 2000, achieved a 51% enrollment capacity. In 2013, that fell to 43% when we ramped up the number of programs that we offered. And then again in 14 and 15, we hope to strike that balance with the 75% where the program actually reaches capacity and fills up. The key for recreation programming, obviously, is you have to keep it fresh and by continuing to try new programs that will appeal to the community. Some go. Sometimes we try a new program, don't know whether it's going to go or not, but certainly our staff do a great job of providing a mix of opportunities for the community to enjoy. And the other thing that we do is really look at that needs assessment that we conduct periodically. One of the things we heard the last time we surveyed our residents, they said they'd like to see those increased fitness and wellness programs, outdoor recreation programs, and then more adult and senior activities too. So the other thing I'd mention as far as recreation goes is that we are seeing increases in the participants in our league programs. Basketball, volleyball, those continue to grow each year. And I think last year we actually set a record for the number of basketball teams that are in our leagues. Another outcome indicator is to provide a safe, functional, and aesthetically pleasing park system. One of the things we strive to do and that we're able to do since 2012 is to mow all of our park areas weekly and inspect all park areas daily for litter for Memorial Day. We've achieved that, and then we also want to be mindful of our need to keep up with developed park acres as it relates to percentage of the city limits. And we can see that with the numbers that we have on the screen, we're maintaining a pretty consistent percentage at 5%. Enhancing customer satisfaction, customer service and user satisfaction is another important tracking mechanism. In 2012, 93% of our residents thought that the quality of our parks were good or excellent, and our goal is to maintain that rating. The other thing we track is the quality of our recreational opportunities, and they too receive positive rankings at 69%. We're obviously in a mode of continuous improvement. So in 2014, our goal is to increase that number to 75% and hopefully score a little better with our efforts in the recreation area. Now a little bit about the zoo. For some of you as new council members, we felt it would be important to give you a little background on what the relationship between the city and the zoo is and how all that works. And just talk a little bit about our responsibilities and the society's responsibilities. For your information, the city funds one full-time employee and several seasonal employees to perform an important role at the zoo, to perform tasks such as tree trimming and removal, snow removal, maintenance of the restroom near the carousel. We're also in charge of the grounds maintenance outside of the exhibits. We don't interact with any animals. We don't feed anything. We mow the grass. We trim the grass. And we do irrigation repairs, landscaping, and other duties associated with maintaining the number of acres that we've got out there. And so it's really doing what we feel like we do best and leave the other work to the zoo staff and their expertise in managing the animal collection and the visitor experience out there. All operations performed by the Zoo Society, the visitor services, all that other stuff is performed by them with support from the city of $1.4 million as proposed in this year's budget. We also do support the zoo with some capital funding and some OSEP funding, which varies from year to year depending on what we have on the docket. And in 2015, we'll be investing approximately $500,000 in capital. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Elizabeth Whaley. Elizabeth is the CEO and Executive Director of the Zoo Society to give you an update on what's going on with the zoo.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Elizabeth Whaley. I'm the president and CEO of the Great Plains Zoo, and it's always really fun to come talk with you about your community zoo. As Don said, we have a very good partnership with the City of Sioux Falls. The zoo is a living, breathing organization that lives on city land, in city buildings, but the Zoo Society as a nonprofit takes care of those buildings for the City of Sioux Falls, and so you give us a management fee every year for that. It's really fun for me to give you a look at the numbers because the numbers continue to grow. We now have 256,000 visitors a year, and half of those people come from outside of Sioux Falls zip codes. So people are really coming to check out the zoo. It's also interesting to note that that visitation number is 87% more than it was when we entered into our agreement in 2006. So we had about 137,000 visitors then. Last year, 256,000 visitors, almost double the attendance of it was just a few years ago. We know that we bring people from out of town and actually from about a 3-hour area here to visit our zoo. We're one of the biggest attractions in South Dakota, but we're also a community resource. There are so many things that your zoo offers in terms of education and meeting spaces and opportunities to get up close to animals. So even though we find ourselves being a tourism draw, we very much feel that we're a cornerstone of the Sioux Falls community. We now teach over 40,000 kids in very unique educational settings, again, both on-site at our 45-acre campus and throughout the 4-state area. And that's about double what it was just a few years ago. We're a key player in breeding 18 endangered species, and we care for about 1,000 animals. So it's a pretty interesting, complicated organization. We're a hospital, we're an educational offering, we run a restaurant, we run a visitor attraction, we run camel rides, all sorts of things. And with your help, I think we lost a slide. As Don mentioned, it's really important to note that this is a partnership, and in 2006, we all remember where the zoo was. It was not in very good shape. People were not coming out to see what we were doing because it wasn't a pleasant place to be. It was kind of a sad place to be. And through our partnership, our renewed agreement in 2006, both the Zoo Society and the city really said, let's rebuild our zoo and have a great zoo. And I think we've done that. We've all worked very hard. And it's good to note that in the last 8 years, the city's support has been flat. But I'm very pleased to say through private investment, the Zoo Society has grown the budget by 83%. As I mentioned, increased attendance by 87%. And we've increased the city's physical assets by 85%. So when you make that capital investment in buildings at the zoo, we pair it with private money, private investment, often more than matching what you're investing as a city. And then at the end of the year, we hand that over to you and it becomes your asset. So we hope that you're very proud of your community zoo. You always have our promise to work really hard and make sure that we take great care of any investment that you make in the zoo. Any questions?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Questions for Elizabeth or Don? Councilor Rolfing.
I noticed in the capital budget in 2019, there's $439,000 for an interpretive center at the Veterans Memorial Park. Is that going to be, or are there going to be private funds added with that, or is that?
Yeah.
That's going to be enough?
Yeah, it's really a placeholder. We've been working with the Veterans Memorial Park Advisory Board on the concept of building an interpretive center at Veterans Memorial Park. And I think the thing that we're working on is just trying to find out what that right mix of public and private dollars would be, how would it be operated, and I know our board even recently has talked a little bit more about that, about how do we pull this off, how do you pay to operate it, and that kind of stuff. And so it's a work in progress.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Don, regarding Family Park, I know we've got the dog park budgeted for 2015. At what point is paving the road out there budgeted?
Yeah, it currently is still in the county, and so we're, Mike in planning isn't requiring us to pave those at this point. We have done some dust control on those from time to time, but I think what we're trying to do is wait to actually do the paving of the roads and the parking lots until we either get annexed or we just feel like it's time, there's enough use to warrant actually paving those.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Councilor Anderson Jr.
Don, let's talk about Falls Park West. Talking about adding parking in that is that along Phillips Avenue there?
That's correct.
So we're going to tear out the street, the curb and gutter, and the sidewalk that we put in there already, and put in parking, and then redo everything?
Yeah, the background on that is that at one point we had talked about putting a parking lot actually in Falls Park West. And as we got to looking at developing the master plan for Falls Park West, as we looked at it, we felt like the use of the diagonal parking, very similar to what's on Phillips Avenue now, is probably the best use of the park space, so that we don't have a parking lot sitting in the middle of our park that really doesn't fit very well as we looked at laying out Falls Park West. And so what this would do is it would provide 70 stalls, very similar to what the apartments on the other side of the street. I don't know if you've noticed the new diagonal parking that they put in there. We would do the same thing on the east side of Phillips Avenue, along with redoing some of those walkways that would be impacted by the parking. That would actually provide 70 additional parking stalls for people to use during the day if they're happening to be visiting the park, during our events that we might have in the park. And so that's the idea behind doing the diagonal parking.
With that being said, it's pretty well known that there's still some environmental issues over there. What are we going to do with that? I know if we're going to be putting in a parking lot or something, aren't we going to have to do more than a surface cleanup in that area?
Yeah, that's a great question. Much of that area is contaminated, as you mentioned, Councilman Anderson. And what we're doing with the master plan is making sure that, or doing everything we can to avoid the contamination. And we're doing that by putting the infrastructure on the south end of the park, so that if we have to dig in utilities and footings and foundations, we can do that where it isn't contaminated. Because the southern portion, I'll call it the southern fifth of the park, so to speak, does not have contamination, and so we're okay. We don't have that clay cap on top of it. And so the other design methods that we would use would either use spread footings possibly so that we don't have to penetrate that clay cap, or just use more of a landscaping type approach, building up berms so that we can plant trees and do other work there. And so it was kind of a vetting of our design process. We went over and over again saying, how do we do this so that it doesn't really essentially double the cost of making improvements on that contamination? So that's a great question.
Thank you.
You bet.
If I could follow up to Councilor Anderson's question on the parking, how many parking spots are we gaining and what's the cost?
The additional stalls are projected at 70.
70?
70, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And the cost is, let me check here.
How old is the sidewalks and curb and gutter and all that there? I mean, what's our life expectancy?
482.
The first question on the cost is the parking is projected to be $316,000.
Okay.
And I don't know if anybody can help me. They were there when I got here, so I'm not sure. I know they're at least 9 years old, but anybody else? Yeah, I'd say in that 7 to 10 year time frame, I would think.
Okay. Okay. Councilor Kiley?
By placing the parking along Phillips Avenue, I'm assuming that's going to actually save us green space in the area then?
That's correct.
What's the trade-off in terms of parking spaces from what was originally proposed?
We were looking at more along the lines of 100 spaces versus 70. And so what we've done is we also met with all the adjacent property owners, Lloyd Properties, Sioux Steel, Raven, Gorley Building, downtown Sioux Falls, and just really tried to talk through that with them. And they felt like that was a much better use of the space to put it in the right-of-way versus plopping it down in the middle of the park where we really want to have open space and green space. So that was the idea.
I would agree. I would trade 30 parking spaces for the green space.
Councilor Anderson?
Riverdale Park improvements. Fire marshals requiring fire protection for the buildings at Riverside. Is that just the storage buildings, or is that also the restroom?
Yeah, it's that restroom, the junior football building.
But isn't that restroom is all concrete?
Yeah.
So why is this going to change the policy then as we go forward with restrooms in our parks? Are we going to have to add sprinklers?
No, I don't believe we'll have to add sprinklers, but we're not close enough to a fire hydrant, and so that's what they want us to provide for.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. I think. Right, Tori?
Councilor Jameson.
Don, keeping the SFERC open till the end of the year, how much, could you help me understand exactly what you're budgeting to keep that open?
Yeah, what we did is just project. We have pretty good financials on the expense side, over the historical use of that facility. And so we're projecting that would be, if we was to continue to operate, and that would operate for the entire year, we had a number of, let me see here, I've got it here, $202,000 to operate it, because one of the things that's pretty fixed is the operational cost to keep the ice and that kind of thing. So that's the expense side, and then not knowing what would happen, we projected $54,000 in revenue, but I believe that was before we proposed the rate increase to match the Iceplex. So not sure how that'll ultimately end up, but we did that based on not knowing, so we did put it in the budget.
So somewhere around that 150.
Yeah,
that in, okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then the Parks Board capital improvement recommendations. Is that a document that is available to the council?
Yeah, certainly would be. You bet.
Can you maybe summarize it? Is it mirrored in this proposed budget, or is it different?
The only thing we usually guarantee the Park Board is that it would change before the council approves the final document, because what the Park Board is aware of is that it's a plan that Park Board is only looking at the Park Board projects. They're not looking at what's going on the streets or any other city department. And so what we explain to them is that once we get it from the Park Board, it goes to finance and it gets considered along with all the other department projects the city needs to do. And so it is not only a balancing act within our 5-year capital program within Parks and Rec, but we also have to balance among all the other departments. And so there's sometimes Public Works will be asked to move stuff forward and us back, and vice versa, to try to make it work by a year. So, but yeah, it is available.
I don't know if it's in the minutes, probably someplace, and I could find it myself. But yes, if you could send it to me at least, that'd be great.
You bet. We'll do.
One other question or two. I've had a question about the bike trails. Lots of great comments. First off, they love it. A lot of people love it. Some have complained about us renting or charging for park structures, for picnics, those $25 reservation or cleanup fee things. And then they hear about the millions that we're spending on the bike trail and the greenway, and but why don't we charge anybody to use the greenway? Now, I understand why we don't. I mean, it's a great asset, but how do we draw the line between what we do charge for and what we don't? And there are certain individuals in the community certainly who would never use the bike trail system, but how do you do that? How do you decide where we should and shouldn't charge for?
Yeah, it's a good question. For clarification, you don't have to pay the $25 fee to use the shelter. You only have to pay if you want it to guarantee that it's reserved. And so there is an option whether or not all shelters have to be reserved either. There are some that you can use without reservation requirements. But what the reservation fee essentially does is that there is a crew that goes out and cleans those. They post the reservation because if your reservation is important enough, you want to guarantee that you have that. That's really what's intended to do. And then our crews will post the reservation so that they know that, hey, Don can't come kick Greg out because he was here first. It allows him to ensure that we have that reservation. So we do quite a few of those reservations. We rent quite a few, but that's the background on it.
Just to follow up, how do you decide, though, what services you should charge for? I mean, like swimming passes. I get that. You go and swim and you should have to pay for a fee to get in. But the bike trail, I mean, we spend a lot of money there too, and not everybody rides a bike, but is there a methodology to it all? How do you?
Yeah, I think if there's some time from an administrative or maintenance standpoint, we would look at that. For example, if you want to rent our portable sound stage where we have to physically take it out to, we charge for that. In the case of the bike trail, we don't reserve anything. We don't set anything up for you to be able to use that. You just use it casually just like you would any other park. For example, if you want a special event and you're going to need some support from the city, whether it be logistically or whether it's police, fire, health, electrical inspections, those types of things, then there is a fee associated with that. So if there's a specific return on a request for service, then that's typically when we would look at charging a fee. I don't know if that's making any sense or not. But
that helps, thanks.
Yeah.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Just one thing, in all this conversation that we've had in the community about bike safety and how great the bike trails are and all of that, one of the things that I've heard, and I feel like it's maybe people saying we want more, but I've heard our bike trails are not wide enough. I know that we've added to the width of them all the way around now. Are we now at a point where people are just saying, well, so-and-so has it wider, we need it wider? Or do we really need to think about down the road, how do we add another 2-3 feet to it? Is that something that's in the conversation yet, or is it just reaching way too far?
Yeah. It's a relatively small item. It didn't make our budget presentation, but one of the things we were able to see at one of our recent national conferences was they're now making these trail counters that you can, instead of somebody with a check mark going by, it's kind of like the traffic counters. It can sense whether it's pedestrian or it's a bike. And so we have 4 or 5 trail counters actually in our bike trail development project, so that we can start to track that, because we've heard that a lot. We have widened it. We used to be 8, now it's 10. Then it went to 10. Now it's 12. People are talking about, can we have shared parallel trails? What sections of the bike trail system should we have that in? Well, none of us really know how many people are using it, when they're using it. And so we said, let's get some data to support what we decide to do there. And so we have some trail counters in our budget, and we think that'll be very insightful to us. We've done, through Public Works, they've helped us with some trail counts, but it's, we just need better information to be able to make some of those decisions and recommendations on whether it's wider or more trails and where.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thanks.
You bet.
Councilor Rolfing.
I wanted to revisit what Councilor Jamison had talked about how you determine this, and Councilor Anderson and I came up with an idea for the bike trail especially, that maybe we could put in some toll booths, and we'll call it the Jamison toll booths.
Fine, as long as I get a percentage.
Okay then. How do I gain control? I have 2 questions for you, Don.
Okay.
Can you provide to Dave Bixler the details of the SFRC budget
Yeah.
revenues, where they're going to come from, expenditures, what we're paying for. I guess I want the inside baseball information on that provided to him to share with the rest of the council. Last question, and you might have covered this, but I might have lost it in the presentation. Improvements other than buildings. We're going from $1 million to over $6 million. What was that about?
Can you reference a page?
Page 68 of our budget book.
Well, you must be in the operating budget, huh?
It would be under expenditures, improvements other than buildings, so it would be a capital expenditure. Yeah, almost 500% increase.
I probably need Tori's or Krista's help with that. It's how the assets are signed and classified, and so I don't know if either one of them have an answer, or we can get back to you on that as well.
Please.
It is a big increase.
It's a big number,
yeah.
so,
yep.
yeah.
I think it's just how they fall and the character of the type of improvement, but certainly can get back to you with that information too.
You would, please.
You
Thank
bet.
you. Any other questions? Councilor Erickson.
Just piggybacking off of what Councilor Karski said about the SURF, if you could include too what we pay for. I mean, it's not just utilities to run the building, and we've also got overhead and this, just so it's a total picture, so we get all of it together.
Yep. You bet.
All righty, that would conclude this week's budget hearing. City Council meeting begins in 65 minutes, so meeting adjourned.